So this is the same disclosure I had yesterday. Nothing changed. but right, right. But one thing I will mention that occurred to me, since I do head this not-for-profit consortium of the Huntington Study Group that previously was part of a university, the University of Rochester, going from part of a university to an independent study group that is able to contract and carry out a variety of studies with a variety of sponsors has really, I think, assisted in the whole issue of data sharing. And if there's time, I might just mention that, but that occurred to me afterwards. So what are the data on data sharing, particularly in academia? Well, about a decade ago, there were a flurry, mostly from one group, of surveys that were done in academia, Campbell, the Blumenthal group, and they surveyed a variety of academic investigators, and the outcomes I just summarized here is that there were a lot of reasons cited by academic investigators for not sharing data. Again, this is about a decade ago, but there hasn't really been a particular update on this. And these are not surprising. The effort required to produce the requested data, big time effort, the opportunity cost, you're not doing something else, the need to protect the author's ability to publish. We talked about desire to protect one's ability to publish. The financial costs that I alluded to a little bit that I'll mention again, the need to protect patient confidentiality, and the need to protect commercial value of the results. So this was a snapshot, and I'm not sure it's changed that much in the past 10 years, although we're very interested in this and have undertaken a refreshed survey not only of academia but also of industry through collaboration. So the topic of incentives, I was thinking maybe come up with some ideas. Some are obvious, but some might be novel and even considered innovative. So one is this whole idea about the first crack. And I think I like the parallel that it takes time for a commercial sponsor to recover the costs and the investment, and I think that's very understandable. And also there needs to be a period of time for the investigators in academia, not so much to recover any kind of financial costs, but that effort to go on. It takes a period of time. How long that period is, I think varies, but I think generally we're talking about a year, 18 months or so to get out that primary analysis. I think a real big important part, I think the whole concept of changing the culture of data sharing is very important, is to begin to understand the costs of data sharing prospectively from the beginning, not after the fact. And I think having that information in hand and also having the sponsor or sponsors mindful of those costs going forward, I think will make a lot of difference. I think also there's a possibility of recovering the costs from data users for access to sharing. I'm not talking about big profit costs, it's kind of shipping and handling costs, which I think, as we've looked at this, can amount to a considerable cost. And I think the real interesting things that I've been thinking about and discussing with my colleagues is the recognition of data sharing as a form of professional credit. And I think there's various ways to do this, to recognize it. One is the use of data by others. So as I mentioned yesterday, the ADNI group, Alzheimer's Disease Neuroimaging Initiative, which is not a clinical trial but an observational study, requires this type of acknowledgement and recognition. So it comes back to the data generators. And I think the culture hasn't changed that much, but I think it's changed a little bit in academia to realize that clinical research in general and randomized controlled trials in particular is a team effort. And therefore, this should really be understood. And I think it's also true of other parts of science that this needs to be brought up and acknowledged in terms of a promotion and that type of recognition. I think, and it was just mentioned before, I spent a lot of time reading clinicaltrials.gov, and one of the reasons I do it as a journal editor, I see a lot of clinical trials coming forward, and I want to go back and understand the origin of it. But I think there's a lot of room in clinicaltrials.gov, not only for the updating of clinical trials, and I don't know the last time they took a look at how many were updated, but very few get updated in real time, and after a while even there's still a large number of clinical trials that never get updated, let alone published. And I think having that public record is important, but I think it'd be nice that possibly in clinicaltrials.gov that there could be a section on data sharing. This clinical trial does or does not provide data sharing, and what kind of model of data sharing does it provide? Everything from open access to restricted access to the types of models that we talked about yesterday. So I think that in and of itself would be a terrific vehicle for public recognition and information about sharing. And I think also that review committees who review grant applications should take into consideration one's history of data sharing in terms of those types of decisions that are made. I even took a crack at what we might do in industry, although I think Michael will talk about that a little bit, but working with industry over time, obviously the whole issue of protecting intellectual property is important, and there also may be some recovery of costs for data use, again, the shipping and handling costs, but again, they might be considerable. I think, again, recognizing industry sponsors who have shared data in whatever form would turn out to be important, and also in published reports to indicate also that data sharing has been part, and the provisions of data sharing have been actually part of the publication. I'd even go so far as to consider now, as I understood the discussion on patents and data exclusivity, it's in the U.S., it's the U.S. Patent Office that provides patents, but it's really the regulators that provide this exclusivity under a framework of a certain time frame. And I think it could be even considered that either on the front end in terms of fast-track review or even the period of exclusivity could be adjusted according to the extent of data sharing. Now, I haven't given this a lot of thought, but I think if you're really looking for incentives, one should consider this, because this might also increase the incentives for industry sponsors, and of course reputation, altruism, and goodwill. So I think those are the sticks. There's a lot of carrot there. I mean, that's a carrot. There's some sticks. Some journals have gone so far as to require data sharing as a condition for peer review. One interesting thing, we talked about academia having the ability to share data, and it's been about 34 years since Bayh-Dole granted these intellectual property rights to academia, and there's actually a provision in the Bayh-Dole Act for march-in rights that if it's not used, then I think it's the Department of Justice that can come in and take those data back and use them. Now, I don't think that's ever been exercised. I don't think there's a case on that, but that's another stick to consider. And I think public ratings of history of data sharing and reputation fall under that. I think I'll stop here because my time's up, and leave the rest for the general discussion.